That's the end of the preambles. His fascisms, his wokeisms, his all that stuff. Well, maybe
There's
we'll
no
be
such
able
thing
to.
as woke. Everyone is fascist.
We'll be able to chug through this part faster. Maybe I'll even double speed the climate stuff. I've even cut it down. I've cut it down to where some of it's like where he's ranting.
Salt Lake was named by Brigham Young when he arrived in the valley. He actually said the Great Salt Lake City.
So one of the things that it does frustrate me and irritate me about this is I pulled this clip up of the New York Times Salt Lake thing. And he's just regurgitating this article. It's just like, let's go regurgitate this article to the John DeLynne's crowd. And it was a big deal. I know even like Glenn Beck covered it, saying, look at these guys turning all their attention to Salt Lake for some reason.
He's saying that the farmers, they can farm all they want, but they have to really farm the way we say. They now have to have more ethanol. So while we're going into a food shortage, we are burning food, which will create a food, listen to Samantha Power, a climate change emergency, and an energy shortage, a climate change emergency. Today or yesterday in the New York Times was this story. As the Great Salt Lake dries up, Utah faces an environmental nuclear bomb. How many times have you heard this administration or other administrations say that this is the World War II of our generation? It's a war progressives of the past could only dream of, because there's no benchmarks for success. It's only over when they say it's over. And President Biden is just getting started. This week, he authorized the use of the Defense Production Act. That's a Cold War era law that gives the president significant authority to control domestic industries to accelerate clean energy. So he has taken over some industries, just like Wilson said, they can stay in business, but they'll do it our way. That is fascism.
And I have some clips on why they're turning their attention to Salt Lake.
Stuck from there when he named Salt Lake City. Nobody says the Great Salt Lake City anymore. That's what he named it in the beginning. And it is an inland sea that has no outlet to the ocean. It was formed. The lake has been around for a long time. I think 22,000 years or so ago, there was a great big Lake Bonneville that covered all the Intermountain West, and then it had a catastrophic failure and drained out to the ocean and left this inland sea.
Those are cool
In the 80s,
images.
Salt Lake was 3,300 square miles. So if you can imagine, it's enormous. It's this enormous plain, and it's fed by all the rain and water that falls into the Wasatch Mountains. So it is this giant lake, and because it doesn't have any outlet to the ocean, it just collects everything that comes into the rainwater. In the 80s, that's when we had flooding, like in Salt Lake City, and we built Norm Bangerter built the big pumps that are out in the desert. It's been in decline since I think 1984. It's been in continual decline. Now it goes through natural ebb and flow cycles. We just broke the record of the last low point, which I think was in like 1962. So it has shrunk and risen throughout the years. It is a lake that sits between 9% and 12% salinity, and it's fed by three major rivers. On the north side is the Bear River, and then on the south side you have the Jordan River, which brings water to the Great Salt Lake from Utah Lake, which is a toxic lake right now from blue-green algae blooms. And then
me and my idiot friends used to swim in that water. We were so dumb.
The Weber River are major tributaries, but all the water that falls on this side of the Wasatch Mountains basically runs down into the Great Salt Lake. There's no other outlet. It is the largest inland sea in the Western Hemisphere, and it is the 8th largest inland sea in the world. It is an extensive ecosystem that is home to over 10 million migratory birds that come through. Interesting thing, I grew up just probably 2 miles east of it, and because the edges of it are kind of
Where did you grow up? Yeah.
Deadish, I'll say they're not really dead. They're all teeming with life. But for our agricultural and recreational desires, the Great Salt Lake kind of gets ignored. If you go out to Antelope Island, where the beaches used to be, they're high and dry now. I don't know where you go if you want to swim in the Great Salt Lake. You probably go to Antelope Island and walk for 2 miles to get to the water or something. But there's not that many people who actually visit it. There are sailboats that were on it, but they're all basically grounded right now. The docks are all.
Didn't you go and wade in it kind of recently, Flip? You went and spent some night out wading in it?
But yeah, that's kind of that's a drug story. Yeah, I did acid. I did acid and spent the night on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. And that was pretty nuts, though, because in the middle of the night in the darkness, I walked because we set up a little fire on the beach. And then, because it's kind of a long story, but so I walked out there, and it was like a mile or so out. I don't know, it was a while. To go there and back, probably took me a couple of hours. But yeah, in the middle of the night, I went and I call it a son of the salt. I became a son of the salt. And splashed around in the water there. But that's actually really fun because I was tripping on acid and I was just walking. It was just one of those things that you wouldn't think about unless you were walking through the darkness on the dry bed of the Great Salt Lake on acid. But I realized how many kinds of dirt there are that I experienced entirely through my feet because I was barefoot. And
You
I was
didn't
like,
realize
and I
that
was
was
like,
toxic sludge. You
I
got
didn't realize
throat
the toxic
cancer
sludge. It was
now.
like, yeah, there's you know, because there's crunchy, dry, there's sploopy, and there's squishy, and like and there's yeah, there's slurpy. And I
Man,
was
this
like,
is a
wow,
drug
I never
story.
thought about how much kind of dirt there is. Yeah, and because things, and you know, and again, like because I couldn't see for shit, I couldn't. It was dark. There was no moon, and like I was just following I was like using lights from buildings as reference point to navigate until I heard the sloshing of the water. It was awesome. It was a lot of fun.
One night like that up in the mountains, the same area, I may or may not have a drugstore like that too, and I realized that there was like a rainbow of dirt colors. Like there's like you're saying, there's a different feeling. I realize the colors like have their own dirt rainbow. I'm like, oh, there's all these different browns across the rainbow thing about that, you know. All right. So he talked about Bonneville Flats, and they brought up Saltaire. So I brought up got this little clip you might like.
Oh, it has this long history of being a resort on the shore.
Hooray.
Yeah, that's a song dedicated to Saltaire by the Pixies. He brought up Saltaire, and he brought up this Carnival of Souls video.
Time, like I think in the Edwardian era.
I clip these things in. These guys, I don't know why they can't just clip in like little videos like this and stuff they talk about.
Where you know everyone would go down their bloomers, and it was really this beautiful resort. But the problem is it keeps, and there's an old horror movie from the 50s that they filmed in the ruins of Saltaire, which is great if you can find it. But
Carnival of Souls
getting high and dry. So because the lake is always fluctuating, these recreational opportunities kind of would dry up with the fortune of the water.
Yeah, it looked like glamorous times to see those photos. There's Antelope Island, which is a fun little place to visit, and Bryne.
Even on double speed, look how slow movies were back in the 50s.
So, but let's jump in. So let's talk about the problem. What's the problem? So Great Salt Lake, you already just told me that it was at this level in '62, so I can argue that it just comes and goes, and that's part of nature.
So, I mean, maybe I can jump forward on this stuff because we don't want to go over all the little details, but it's basically Doomsday for Salt Lake, right? And is there any points that we need to hit? He gets on about usage and growth, and there's going to be a problem with usage and growth. And so I have these other things that are
what the places are, but Salt Lake in particular is a growth-based economy. So a lot of construction, and it has the agricultural roots.
So I have these clips about stuff that has been going on around Salt Lake. A lot of people don't realize that it is a port authority, and it's an area that the WEF, World Economic Forum, has its eyes set on very, very strongly. Yeah. Right around that same area of Salt Lake City is an area where I think it's about 20% of all the GDP of the U.S. goes through.
So it's been there for a long time. But because of the arid nature of the area, use a lot of the water, okay?
So
as we have higher and higher
Spencer Cox and these different people, this lady Foxley, who's actually a member of the WEF, who he just put in as some sort of treasurer or something, say that this is a great place to get the fourth industrial revolution started. And I think anytime you have people who are starting to talk about that, and then we know these same people are the ones pushing the different reset policies and that sort of stuff. And we also knew that they were going to suddenly hard jag into watch out for climate because it's an emergency. When you have people like that starting to push these fear angles, like I said, all these different ideas about what's going on in Salt Lake may be true, may not be true, but the people who are pushing for it, the people who are making moves on it, we know what types of stuff they do. They are also the ones in charge of ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores, giving to businesses and that sort of stuff. It could be totally true that the Salt Lake thing is a great big disaster about to happen, but the people who have their designs on it are the epitome of that Mussolini fascism.
And help the world? You can, says Wall Street. Socially responsible investments give you
the opportunity to do good without sacrificing competitive returns.
Cool. I can protect the environment, improve society, invest in companies that respect indigenous people, and create
a more sustainable world, a more compassionate world.
Trillions are pouring in.
Impact investing is growing at a much faster rate than mainline investing.
The full integration of sustainability factors.
Yes, former Vice President Al Gore is one of many promoters.
Can actually enhance returns.
They do enhance his returns. The management fees help him pay for his many homes.
It is the single largest investment opportunity.
His and other allegedly responsible funds say they do two good things.
Support sustainable projects now, while also providing a dignified retirement for people.
But they're really not doing either one of those things.
Economist Thomas Hogan examined their promises.
I've had a lot of experience looking at these types of investments, and they don't actually accomplish the goals of being environmentally or socially responsible.
For example, Al Gore says his so-called sustainable investments
Can actually add to performance.
But
if you look at what they're investing in, they're not really making socially conscious investments. Their number one holding is the parent company of Google. They're just buying basically regular companies.
And we have to find how to get the passive investors.
It makes people feel good. People want to feel like they're making a difference, and these companies are able to sell that.
some so-called green investments did well lately because oil prices dropped. But most will probably give you lower returns because they charge higher fees. This fund eats more than 0.5% of your money every year. Second problem, sustainability is often just marketing. Parnassus brags about the social impact of its investments in, are you ready? U.S. Foods and Clorox. Parnassus says food and cleaning supplies help meet UN sustainability goals like
These companies are saying one thing and giving them another.
In some cases, they do worse. Most green funds won't invest in the Keystone Pipeline. But pipelines are better for the environment than the alternative. Shipping oil by truck.
Ban fracking.
Some green investors oppose fracking. But the U.S. led all countries in reducing carbon emissions, mostly because fracking's natural gas reduced demand for coal and high carbon oil. The ugly truth is that most so-called sustainable investment funds charge more to sell feel-good nonsense.
Ground rules, Jonathan. What is the point of investing, of ESG investing? Is it superior returns, or is it to be able to join the global community of the virtuous, of the people that care about their actions and leaving the world a better place? Which is it?
It's about creating excellent companies that focus on operational efficiency, empowering their workers, protecting the way that they operate from an environmental perspective so that they're efficient in their use of inputs like water, and thinking about risks down the line that might come from things like climate change and changing regulatory expectations. So ultimately, we believe that ESG can help you to create strong investment returns. Now, there are investors who have a lot of exclusions on their investment products and who have other objectives. They're looking for impact. That's not what ESG is. ESG is about looking at financially material, environmental, social, and governance considerations, building them into an investment process, engaging with companies to achieve them, and helping those companies to be even greater as a result.
Vivek, is the jury in on whether you can succeed in superior returns from doing this? Does anyone have numbers that say one thing or the other, that you actually you outperform or underperform what you do? You're doing something based on excellence and corporate excellence that has nothing to do with these other things, which probably come from running a great company. All those other things fall in line without you having to say it up front.
That's exactly right, Joe. And I think that, look, both sides can cherry pick their data, but certainly in the last year, the data are pretty clear that ESG has really underperformed other sectors like the U.S. energy sector. But I think that the point is more fundamental here. One of my issues is the coordination amongst different firms in the asset management industry. All right, take this group called the Climate Action 100 Plus Network. This is a group that boasts that it represents over 50% of global assets under management, over $60 trillion represented in that group. And they coordinate to tell firms to cut emissions. Part of cutting emissions is cutting productions. Well, the problem is that when you have over 50% market share representing entities get together, decide to coordinate on an action like cutting production, and then prices spike at the pump as a result, we have a word for that in this country. It's called an antitrust violation. And the funny part about this movement, Joe, and not a lot of people talk about this, is how this movement, the ESG movement, applies its standards so selectively in the United States and Western Europe without saying a peep in China. And the best example of this, I thought, was actually BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard voting in favor of new directors at Exxon. After those new directors took their seats at Exxon, Exxon cut oil production targets by over 20% from their prior forecasts. But the people who are at the front of the line to pick up the projects that Exxon drops are none other than PetroChina. And if you want the cherry on top, you look at who one of the largest shareholders of PetroChina is. It is none other than BlackRock. So a big part of this is a deep-seated conflict of interest in the ESG movement itself. The firm's effectively saying ESG for thee, China for me. And that's not just bad for our geopolitics, it's also bad for the environment because U.S. natural gas, for example, is 40% cleaner for the environment than Russian natural gas because we don't have methane leakage over here. So I think this movement fails on every prong from prices to investment all the way down to even the environment itself.
Jonathan,
They are the people who are the epitome of trying to merge corporate and state together to control people.
What's happening is there is less snowpack up in the mountains. So there is less water to be had than there was, like, say, in 62.
Hey, John, can I add one quick thing?
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that one of the drivers, just to add a little.
This is in the Deseret News, talking about Klaus Schwab and the founder of the World Economic Forum. This is the Deseret freaking news, you know.
Mormon elements. One of the drivers of the rapidly increasing Utah population is the fact that the church is in decline almost everywhere else in the United States, specifically in California, Washington, and Oregon. And you've got all these.
WF needs help. WF is targeting it. Rhino government sold out. It's in a bad place. Blah blah blah.
Parents who were legacy Mormons in Orange County or in Redmond or Seattle or Portland, and they're realizing their kids are realizing, man.
Spencer Cox appoints Teresa Foxley and Dan Herritt to Inland Port Authority.
If we try and raise our kids here, they're going to get eaten up by the Gentiles. They're not going to be able to be a part of strong wards, strong youth programs. They'll fall away from the church. And so Utah, is deceptively growing in its Mormon population.
Who is Teresa Foxley?
So
she's the president
right
and
now,
CEO of Economic Development Corporation of Utah. In a capacity, she wrote that this indicating Utah's position is a crossroads for the physical communications infrastructure.
So right now, the local communists they have been protesting the inland port hard. But I kind of wonder if that's going to switch. Because
they'll get told to. If they just get in line with the NPC new orders or whatnot. But
because there was a whole ruckus where like they interrupted a meeting and a bunch of people got arrested and they lied through their damn teeth about what happened.
So the area of the Golden Spike is just right a little north of the Salt Lake, and it's like an intersection. It's an intersection of all the Western port and all this other things going down to Mexico port all the way up into Canada port. It is kind of like the heart of the what all stuff ships through, and there's major designs for it to be one of the first places that really integrates new IT tech stuff. I have some clips from some of the Port Authority talking about it here.
To suggest that immigration into Utah is being driven by Mormons. As a matter of fact, population.
This is not stuff John Larsen's saying, or I even think he's aware of. All he's worried about is that lake. But I promise you, some of the people pushing out some of the freak out about this
percentage
stuff.
Of people identify as Mormon compared to the rest of the population has been steadily declining, which would be a counter indicator of that.
All I'm saying on this stuff is watch out. Just watch out. Watch out for all this. Like, what's going on or not. Just be skeptical of all of it.
But definitely on a micro scale, there are people who come to Utah to be around other Mormons, to be in the culture. But a lot of the growth just follows the same growth patterns that we're seeing in Phoenix, in Miami, in Houston, in Austin. So
it's going to be different growth here in Salt Lake. Like, this is a focus.
You have all these cities that are in climate danger zones. They're growing very quickly because most of the population still does not see climate change as a threat.
One way to me is why is Utah?
And they talk about like those new generation cities and all that type of stuff. It's part of it.
And could you explain some of the background of how it exists? Thanks, investor, and having me. I really appreciate it. Why does Utah have a port? Well, inland ports are not a new concept, not a new thing. They basically are support relief, port station, port deployment, and support seaports. What's unique about Utah is we have direct connections to sort of the three major West Coast gateways, road and rail connections to LA Long Beach, to Oakland, and to Seattle Tacoma. And uniquely among sort of inland port areas, we have that kind of connectivity to the West Coast gateway. Utah has long been the crossroads of the world, and we're trying to build on that, so that legacy of the Golden Spike right up to today and going into the future. That's why Utah. Like Andrew said, I work at Port LA, Port of Los Angeles, I was at Port Tacoma, so I've been in ports for quite a while here, and that's how Andrew and I got together. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it. So I think one of the things that's always interesting for non-supply chain people like us, Jack, is that maybe you can give some figures on the sort of the volume of cargo and how that affects sort of the general economy that moves not only through Utah but through the West Coast ports, and so people have an idea of just how important they are in day-to-day industry. Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew, because logistics really is the lifeblood of our economy, in fact, the global economy. About 40% of the nation's GDP moves through our West Coast ports, with a big portion of that going to LA Long Beach. About a third of that traffic, just with the LA Long Beach traffic alone, goes through Utah alone. The truck miles traveled per year, the rail cargo flows, the air cargo flows through Utah is pretty significant. About a third of Utah's economy is directly tied to logistics and goods movement. So it's a vital part of the Utah economy, it's a vital part of the U.S. economy. It truly is the lifeblood.
So we'll move on, but one of the things he talks about is like Walmart, Amazon, Costco. They're all looking to put major warehouses and hubs right up there. The same.
Yeah.
And so
all across the
there's people who push false narratives in this world for their purposes of taking over land and area and water rights, and have a long track record of it. who have their designs in this exact spot, and the New York Times coming out making a big stink about it, just take a squinty look at it.
The growing population.
Growing population. But our soils all through the West are drying out. Part of the weather pattern of Salt Lake and what gives it that powdery snow that is so popular with the ski resort comes from the lake effect,
going
which is weather patterns
down
move from the west to the east, and they will cross the lake, and then it will churn more of that water that's in the lake up into the storm systems. And from what I read from BYU, is they estimate that 10% of all
so it's just a
snowfall on the Wasatch
bunch
Front
of big
comes from
long
the lake.
list of
Okay, I mentioned
other
salinity,
horrible,
and
terrible
it's
things that are
important.
going to
The lake
happen.
generally fluctuates between 9 and 12%.
So
There
as
are
a climate
this year,
layman,
we are going to hit 17% salinity.
I don't know anything about climate change, really. I don't know a whole lot about it. And it's the weirdest thing because I try to stay very partial to it or impartial when it comes to it, because some of the things he does point out about a lot of the Mormons I grew up with is kind of on, because I've seen Mormons get angry at the existence of a Prius because they're like, you some sort of environmentalist or whatever. And as a kid, I was always like, well, okay, but whether or not they're effective, like if they were effective, you seem just angry at the idea of an electric car. And that sounds stupid to me. Shit, I lost my train of thought.
Well, the electric car stuff, I mean, there is all sorts of problems with it in the sense of, I have some clips at the end if we want to get to it, because I just tacked them on if we want to see it. That's one of the reasons it's extra long, is I do have rebuttal clips. But part of the problem with like electric cars is they aren't green. They aren't as green as people want you to believe they're green.
Oh, for sure.
No renewables are as green as people want them to be. There's always this question mark in the air of how much are we really affecting the climate or not. And I have clips. I have clips throughout this, and I'm not saying any single one of them is a definitive thing. And of course, none of them are specifically talking about Salt Lake. This is a very specific subject. But part of the problem is sure, there's probably some climate affecting Salt Lake a little bit. This isn't man-made in the sense of we've affected the global climate, so Salt Lake's going back. This is more man-made that we have used that water to death. We've
Sure. No, I understand that there are a lot of drawbacks to electric cars. What I'm really getting at is one of the areas one of the things that immediately makes me sort of skeptical when people talk about climate change is all of just the crazy doomsday predictions that we've had within my lifetime, like all of the Al Gore ones that.
Climate alarmists are getting close to like Millerite levels of having announced the end of the world so many times.
No, for sure.
Yeah,
but he does that same thing, and then at one point he makes the claim. I don't know where it is. He makes the claim that all of these predictions for climate change have at least gotten to what we thought was the worst case scenario. And I was like, wait a minute.
And he's wrong about that.
That's I don't know as much about it. So I was going to ask, what the hell is he talking about?
One of the most common problems with climate alarmist analyses of data is like they do these models, these like long-term projection models. And like there's a million problems with a lot of these, but one of them is like their models assume humans don't adapt to change.
Yeah, that's a big
problem. They just assume that there's no behavior change. Because the fact is that, like, in the past, what has happened is that people have changed their behavior and everything was fine.
So, but like the Al Gore predictions, if we hadn't made any changes at all, would all of the ice caps have melted like he said they would?
No, we didn't change anything for that.
That doesn't sound like it's possible. It doesn't seem like we changed enough for that disparity between what he said and what happened to be accounted by our own changes.
I think that was just bad science.
I have clips for it. I have clips for it. We'll get to it, but it was bad science. But there is some sort of level with all of them that they have to make predictions that are within the realm of the possible, and they always jut to the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And those worst case scenarios are usually compacting factors. That if the salinity of the Salt Lake goes that bad, then all these other things will happen. Well, if the salinity never went that bad, that compounding all those things 20 years down the line don't make any sense. So it's like your first little thing didn't happen, so the compounding things didn't happen. They're within a realm of possible. They're all within a realm of possible. I think that's the closest you can say to them being honest. They're dishonest in the sense of they'll go back, and it's one of the Thomas Sowell things that he points to, like the elect, because Thomas Sowell calls them, is like they never have to answer for when they got it wrong. Then nobody ever holds their feet to their fire. They can just go make the next prediction. And I have a bunch of clips of like Bryne Ehrlich was one of the guys who predicted the population would be 20 freaking billion right now, and that we'd all be dead, and that we'd be starved to death. And they just couldn't predict all the other things that would come along with that. Even just the concept that populations, as they get more wealthy, they tend to curve off. They tend to have less children. They tend to go the other direction. As Elon Musk right now is saying, population's a problem in the other direction. We're all going to die out because as we get more wealthy, we stop having kids. But there was also the other level of it, is that he was not able to predict how we would adapt to food creation and how even animal populations would grow. You know, like it's a major supersonic, super variant prediction thing. Like if you, one of the biggest things in the world that I can point at is we all got to watch in COVID, something that's much more immediate and much more respondable. We got to watch how bad their predictions were and all of that. And we got to see that more in real time.
Today, trust in the agency has plummeted because COVID-19 exposed the truth. The CDC is thoroughly corruptible, and federal regulators will never be impartial experts. They respond to political incentives just like everyone else, and a fact-driven, purely technocratic state is an impossible dream.
And these are way more variables across way larger periods of time.
Okay,
their models just can't even start to.
I guess we should stray away from the COVID talk because I like seeing my face, and I imagine that the little YouTube thing is blocking my face right now. Thanks a lot.
Well, you'll see some of the other things I have clips. They all have like a little disclaimer at the bottom, like, "Oh, get the actual facts on this stuff."
That's what I'm saying. That disclaimer is blocking my face out right now, you dick.
Sorry. We got Bjorn Lomberg, we got Michael Schellenberger, all these different people who push back, Patrick Moore, and in so many of those cases, most of the people I've at least polled, because there are the people who are saying, no, it's just not even changing at all. And I do have some clips of that from like Tony Heller. But these other people are saying, yeah, there's change. We're on a planet. There's change. Stuff changes and humans affect stuff. Yeah, that's happening. But the way these eco-fascists try to react to it, number one, even if they were trying to aim up and do better with it, they got it all backwards and screw it all up. And they're terrible economists. They're terrible at the triage.
What is the conservative premise? That man is flawed from day one, and that there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And whatever you do to deal with one of man's flaws, it creates another problem. But that you try to get the best trade-off you can get, and that's all you can hope for. I've often said there are three questions that I think would destroy most of the arguments on the left. And the first is, compared to what? The second is, at what cost? And the third is, what hard evidence do you have? Now, there are very few ideas on the left that can pass all three of those kinds of things.
They're terrible at deciding what do we swap for, like how many people can get the benefits of surviving a hot summer because we have cooling systems in replace for what sort of unwanted benefit might come from using natural gas or something like that. They put no triage in that. It's just the same thing as like Fauci. Fauci says, stop the whole economy because 0.1% of the population of old people might die. They don't think in that triage. They don't think in the sense of what you might cause all these other problems by saving your one other little problem that sure is a problem.
My favorite example of how counterintuitively complex all this shit is the New Zealand lamb thing. Do you remember that one? So like and it's all based on study. In fact, I even found it the other day. We can link it if we want, if you want it. But it's from a few years ago. But it was a study in the UK that talked about how, like, so if you live in the UK and you want to eat delicious lamb and you're concerned about your carbon footprint, you are better off buying lamb that was imported from New Zealand than lamb that was grown next door, or one town over, which seems so counterintuitive because everybody, because the whole buy local thing, buy local. and everybody just assumes like, oh, well, yeah, if it comes from closer, then it didn't drive as far. And well, that's better, right? But no, because in New Zealand, sheep graze on natural pasture all year round. Whereas in Europe, at best, you get some natural pasture, but you're going to have to supplement it with feed that was grown and shipped and all this other crap. And so like, and everywhere you look, there's these little factors. Like, so the same thing is true about potatoes. Like if you live in Nebraska, you are better off buying Idaho potatoes than potatoes grown in your backyard if you're worried about your carbon footprint, because the yields are so much better in Idaho and the efficiency is so much better that you're better off trucking it hundreds of miles.
That's a huge word, efficiency too, and it's just things that they can't play with in their brains and stuff that has improved, and it has improved thanks to capitalism in most cases.
Yeah.
And in most cases, it gets shut down by centralized planners or regulators who have major problems. I have clips on all this sorts of stuff. Maybe we shouldn't regurgitate it so much here because we'll get to it. But the flip end of all of it is that nobody's saying that there aren't struggles, that we don't have to tend the garden, or at least the people that I look at. Tony Heller, that is a guy who says you guys are almost completely lying, and people say, yeah, listen to Tony Heller. But one of the things Tony Heller has is 14 years of picking out New York Times articles where they made bold predictions and were just wrong as shit.
Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. In 1989, the United Nations said that we only had 10 years to save the planet from global warming. They said that if we didn't stop global warming by the year 2000, island nations like the Maldives would drown. And 32 years later, the United Nations made the same warning that island nations like the Maldives were going to drown if we didn't stop global warming. But the Maldives are still there. This is what they look like this morning. And in fact, islands like the Maldives have been growing larger over the past 6 decades. The reality is that island nations like Sri Lanka are suffering from a different crisis. They're going bankrupt and having fuel shortages because of extremely high fuel prices driven by climate policy. Their beaches aren't going underwater, but their economies are.
And like I'm saying, 14 years of he almost every day pulls out old articles from 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's almost all he does. And so some of his stuff is saying that like you guys are just catastrophically wrong on all these different things. And I have a clip of that. But the part of his stuff that no matter what you think about somebody who's the climate denier, he can pull articles that we can all see got it wrong as the exact opposite of what Larsen's saying. Is most of their bold predictions were bullshit.
How many times does prophecy have to fail before the prophet loses his authority?
Well, and that's what Thomas Sowell says, is that the elect, these guys never have to answer themselves. The Brian Ehrlich, the guy who had the population thing, he's still a tenured professor at Duke University or something like that.
Step demand for water in Salt Lake City would exceed supply in 2040. So we have 18 years until the hydrologists are expecting.
There's a prediction. So if that 18-year moment, like, because people were talking a couple years back, like AOC made that 12-year prediction or something like that. Like, are they going to get called to the carpet on that side? When that moment comes, is anybody going to sit down with them and say, okay?
Like we're only 8 or 9 years away.
Yeah, if she's somehow still relevant by then, I'm sure she'll get called out.
Yeah, it'll for sure be something that they have to answer to, for sure.
Curve in Salt Lake City with our utilization will match out. Now, I did some research on this a while ago. There are not a lot of studies on the groundwater. The conservative government tends to not like them, and they squash them.
So this is because we're going to speed through it, but this is a contradiction because later he talks about how BYU and the conservative government passed a $40 million bill to research the groundwater.
Yeah, also like, they're not interested in researching groundwater. Like, I just don't buy that. Like, I don't know.
Well, I've got an immediate clip right here because we're going to go to.
We do not know when the groundwater in Utah is going to dry up.
That's not enough firepower.
California.
Like this is just one of those things.
How do you think they do with water in California?
Just my own dumb personal experience, like, and obviously this is very far from expert. This is just a dumb little anecdote. But like years ago, I was a legal courier, and there was lots and lots of times where I had to go to like the records office of the Utah Water Department or whatever the hell they're called, and I would sometimes have to like open up books, like records from the 19th century, where they in painstaking detail go over all of the water flow and all this stuff, where it's like, and you just say, oh, they're not interested in measuring the water situation. Like, no, they do. I've seen it.
Yeah, that was back before we believed in science because we were inundated with Christianity.
Yeah. Another one of his contradictions and all that is that he says he gets most of his ideas by BYU studying this stuff. That's where he gets most of his information. And it's just a contradiction right there. But how do you think they do with water in California? That's the question. I'm a big fan of Victor Davis Hanson, who owns a farm in California and actually works on that farm half of the year. And then the other half of the year, he's just this insanely smart classicist. He talks and knows, and I've listened to him so much. I don't even know, just because I like listening to him, I've ended up listening to him talk for hours about the water situation in California. The conservative government, but he's a real farmer, and he can just talk Larsen under the table about what a liberal government, leftist government does to help with water.
Yeah, that is our friend and colleague, Victor Davis Hansen. Victor is, of course, the Martin Ely Anderson Senior Fellow here at the Hoover Institution. He is a historian and a classicist, a prolific author and columnist, and in his spare time, he's
probably
manages
too
to run a family
fast
farm.
at
He's a
2
multi-generational.
times speed.
Yeah, 2 times is probably not gonna be understood.
I think I had it sped up on the other thing.
1.5 is. Oh, there you go.
Farmer,
I think it was already
in
sped up.
California in the San Joaquin Valley. Victor, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all for having me.
Well, Victor, I think since you're talking to 4 California transplants and you literally are rooted in the California soil, let's talk about one very pernicious issue for California, and that would be the drought. It is going to be a very long, a very hot, a very dry summer in California. And for those not familiar with California, the drought is a multifaceted problem. We have a governor who is encouraging people to voluntarily restrict their water use. Of course, Californians have turned around and increased their water use. We have environmentalists who do their best to block any and all efforts to add water storage. You have Angelinos who just do not want to.
The environmentalists block it. That's who.
Lawns turned around and their cars unwashed. On top of that, Victor, the less water we have in our dams, the less hydropower, which means we're looking at the very distinct possibility of rolling blackouts this summer. So, Victor, you look at California all the time. You need water not just to have a very fertile front yard because it actually matters for your crops. Explain the drought in California and how it ties into the larger issue of California just not able to address its problems.
Well, 2/3 of Californians live where 1/3 of the precipitation. The opposite is true. 1/3 live where there's 2/3. So our ancestors, i.e. in the 1960s, in the California Water Project and the Federal Central Valley Project, had this huge transference, and we finished the projects except the tertiary reservoirs, which would have given us about 10 to 15 million acre feet, Temperance Flats, Sites, Los Banos Grandes. And what that meant was this December, we had the wettest December on record in snow and rain, and we filled some of the reservoirs, but we let most of that water go out. There was not enough storage. And because of fish concerns, environmental concerns, oxygenation in the Delta, we're letting water, as I speak, go out to the Pacific Ocean and not go into, say, San Luis Reservoir. So it's partly that we're in a drought. We have now, since December, we've had some record low months as far as precipitation. We had a pretty good May, but it wasn't enough. And so what's happening now is all over the state, people are drawing water, pumping, and they're not getting any irrigation deliveries whatsoever. The California Water Project that started out as agricultural for the most part is now almost entirely municipal. So when you go by I-5 and you see that aqueduct, it's going to San Jose, it's going to Santa Barbara, it's going to San Luis Obispo, then it goes over into Pyramid Lake to LA, but there's not anything being diverted for agriculture, which means they're pumping, which means they're drawing down on the water table. My well out here, the water table, if we had this conversation 5 years ago, it was 49 feet. Today it's 95 feet. And that meant I had an old well, 60 feet, I had a 120, and then I finally gave up and drilled 450 feet. So, and my 2 ag wells have been going nonstop since, I don't know, May 1st, 24 hours a day. And they pump about 900 gallons a minute. So that's what everybody's doing. The person with the longest straw wins, I guess. And it's very expensive because you're paying 27 cents now kilowatt hour on ag rates. So it's not sustainable. Almond prices are historical lows. It's part of the general malaise, as you pointed out. Well, 8 miles over there is high-speed rail, $15 billion, not 1 foot of track laid yet.
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. That would have paid for all the tertiary reservoirs. We could have had 10 million acre feet of storage for that. They're talking about maybe stopping the dismantling of Diablo Canyon, the huge, gives us 10% of our.
Well, that's just water just dumping out.
Energy, 10% of our energy, but clean. It's a nuclear power plant that's been pretty good near San Luis Obispo. So I don't see any way out of it because we are driven by ideology and not empiricism. And the ideological framework is fueled by $6 trillion in Silicon Valley market capitalization. So they're immune from criticism. They're immune from worries about their own lives. They have enough money to insulate them from the consequences of their own ideology.
And no matter what you hear tonight, you're going to go take a shower tomorrow. And
oh, the contrast.
I think most people.
That guy. I mean, I've got a couple other clips from him. I don't know if we'll go through each of them, but he goes into way more detail about how just the idiotic management by Gavin Newsom and the state is really the reason for the drought. I mean, it's the same thing that happened with the fires down there, and all these idiots got up and about Trump when Trump was absolutely right about talking about raking the floors of the woods. It did cause more fires because the humans didn't remove the dead wood out, and Trump was right. And these idiot galaxy brains, like, oh, Trump's such an idiot. He said rake the forest floor. It's just not true at all. That the conservative government, I mean, Victor Davis Hanson is a MAGA guy. He will talk Larsen under the table about water.
No, because MAGA guys are all stupid.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite parts, because this is a great example of John DeLynn being very clumsy. Because Larsen just said, none of you are going to listen to this and then not take a shower tomorrow to save water. And then John DeLynn, well,
based on anything I'm saying.
I have a house here. I am actually ZeroScaping this summer, so
I'm actually
let you know I'm better.
You're flexing. Now we can punching up.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, so I kind of laid out the problem.
There's a whole. You can look it up. There's a whole bunch of bullshit in ZeroScaping too.
Oh yeah.
That this lake is going to disappear. The winds are going to come and pick up all the arsenic and every other heavy metal and pesticide residue.
Look at his duper delight smile. Whenever he starts talking about that, like he gets like a smile, like a giddy smile on his face about it.
Below it, right across the city. In fact, it's already happening. And Salt Lake City is one of the top 5. They are legion and terrible. I'm sorry, this is sad stuff.
Look at the smile again. This is sad stuff with the smile.
In any of this. Okay, let's talk about some of the
Did
other.
you see that? Am I crazy?
Lakes from around the world who have been through similar things.
There's Owens Lake in California.
Let's
this
talk
is
about
what
Sea.
Flip was
it
talking
was the 4th
about.
largest lake in the world. The Aral Sea in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is now a toxic desert littered with rusting ships and plagued with lung-choking dust storms. The area's once thriving fish industry has been decimated, and the exposed lake bed contains high concentration of crop-killing salts, as well as pesticides, industrial chemicals, fertilizer runoff. These irritants swirl in the air in dust storms, causing tuberculosis, cancer, lung disease for the 10,000 people who live nearby.
Who did it? Who did it, John Larsen? Who was managing that lake when that was drained? Was it communists?
See other lakes that were in a similar situation.
Central planners.
These lakes actually had it better than the Great Salt Lake has it now.
Sure.
Things did not turn out so well for those
Wait,
areas.
didn't it get literally drained? He said it. Did he just say it was that like these lakes had it better than Salt Lake? This lake that was literally drained by communists?
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that like dead now?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's like saying a guy that got shot in the head had it better than a guy that got shot in the hand. I don't get even like whatever.
Yeah. Let's see here. Maybe I can make some speedier
of major U.S. cities. Salt Lake has the lowest per gallon water rates, meaning what they charge per gallon. According to a 2017 federal report, it also consumes more water for residential use than any other desert city, 96 gallons per person per day, compared to 78 in Tucson and 77 in Los Angeles. So we are very thirsty in Salt Lake City. We like our water. Our water is part of our culture, even though we live in a very arid desert.
They were basically making the EPA their henchmen, right? They just come by and be like, it'd be a shame if you got closed down for pollution, right? They really were acting like the mob. Let's go through this. You have to believe when the climate change is real, number 1. You have to believe that human beings are the primary cause of it, number 2. You have to believe that it is going to have catastrophic results imminently, number 3. And you have to believe that we are capable of actually stopping nature's course and preventing those catastrophic results, number 4. You then have to believe that the only people who are capable of stopping said imminent disasters that are being caused by human beings, about which there can be no disagreement, is the government, number 5. And then you have to believe of all the government agencies that the most efficient and effective is, of course, the EPA, number 6. Do you believe all 6 of those? Right. Well, maybe it's a little toasty, but I think Greta Thunberg's full of shit.
Victor Davis Hanson talks about that exact thing. I think there's a reason that SOUTHPARK guys are pointing at it, but corporations do go around and start trying to buy water rights off of local farmers and agriculture stuff. And of course, Larsen, says that it's going to be problems with those agriculture communities. But Victor Davis Hanson talks a lot about how the decline of those agricultural communities is a lot of what the decline in our interpersonal population is. And you have the tragedy of the commons a little bit more, that you had a bigger issue you had where people cared about their little plot of land a bit better. They cared for it better than when it just gets taken over by these big faceless corporations who also are able to get it through regulations. Like there's bottlenecking, and those corporations, through a merger with the government, bottleneck and regulate these places down into needing to sell off, and then they come and buy it from them. But they also get better nowadays at maximizing the efficiency of the stuff. So the efficiency of how much food gets put out, but it's also at a bit of a loss, as Victor Davis Hanson says, at loss of community and a loss of culture. And a lot of that loss of community and loss of culture is why you got lots of things like homeless problems and stuff like that.
You guys around in the Captain Planet era?
Yeah.
I mean, you were around. I just
yeah. Oh, I didn't watch
show.
a ton of it. I watched a little bit of it.
It was one of the funniest things ever, because Captain Planet, like all the bad guys in Captain Planet were just like they were polluting for pollution's sake. Like they just they got glee out of it. We're gonna dump this sludge into the lake. Like they go out of their way to do it, and then Captain Planet kicks their asses. But like one of the funniest parts of this whole thing is, I swear to God, that's almost how he's like characterizing all this stuff. Is like people just take glee in hurting the environment or whatever. And
yeah, it really is. Conservatives don't care about it. Mormons don't care about it. Just yesterday, I was talking to my parents about it, and they immediately were saying, we're planning on ZeroScaping. They talked about the temples just made an announcement that they're going to let all their lawns go yellow, and then they're going to ZeroScape and all that stuff. And they care about it. Mormons care about it. BYU cares about it.
They absolutely do. And I just remember, I don't know, the biggest cities I've ever been in, the most lefty cities ever, are disgusting. They got just trash it. People will litter and they don't care about it. Like I remember one time when I was like 17 years old, everyone around me was Mormon. Everyone around me was very conservative, and littering is like a cardinal sin. And I remember one time I had this Snickers bar, and I ate it, and I like didn't have any pockets in my gym shorts, and I was like, and I put it on the ground and walked away, and I felt so bad. I walked a half a mile back to pick it up and throw it. And I just remember, like, because they love pinning this on this nonpartisan, they love pinning it on the conservatives more. But I remember in Scouts after our camp out, we would all stand in a line and comb the whole campground and make sure there wasn't a piece of garbage that we left there, and things like that showed it's
one of the
shit about the earth.
It's one of the things Flips and I have talked about too in the past. Like, there's no greater conservationist of wildlife than the hunting community, and we got to work around the hunting community in the convention center in Salt Lake, because the major hunting conventions would come to us, and there was so much money put into conserving wildlife and conserving nature in those hunting things. It's more money than these guys will ever round up ever. And those people who actually work with and deal with and hunt rhinos, and one of the things they do is they sell off that stuff that Jimmy Kimmel and all those guys got so irritated about. They sell off the rights to hunt a certain animal. Usually, in most cases, they're hunting off some sort of male who is in the business of killing all the other males inside of a tribe, because that's what some of those males do inside of animal kingdoms. And you got an endangered species, and you got this male who's running rampant, killing other males. So you sell off the rights to have a hunter go kill off that problematic animal. But beyond that,
and it's a stimulation of the economy. Like, it's a big thing for those African villages or whatever, wherever they go to hunt like I don't know, some sort of invasive species or some
premium they paid for it is going to do a ton to go into saving the wildlife of the animal that they did kill, like just major amounts of money into it. And over in an area where the locals do not care at all about saving that wildlife the way that those hunters do. And it's just such a crap caricature. And that's my ultimate irritation, because even some of the stuff, like I've said from the beginning, even once said it with when I first went on Jonathan Streeter, is that some of these issues aren't big issues to me, or they aren't something I care about, or I'm not specifically a conservative or Republican on it myself, but I hate the way these guys caricature them, because they caricature them, in such a stupid way that I feel like I have to defend some of what they're doing and saying in those areas.
Well, that's when the guy was asking us on that John Dehlin post, why do you care about this? And I'm like, look, because I think he's being an ass. Like, I think he's being unfair. And I don't, like, who has a greater right to be unfair of the spokesperson of a community for being unfair than the members of that community, who are then going to be like Like if I'm
exactly.
We're
We're
ex-Mormon and
ex-Mormons.
people associate me with the dumb shit John DeLynn says,
I
I'm going to be
100% agree
bothered
with
by
that.
that. So I'm going to be more critical of him even
I
than
get
I will
so-
be of Mormon prophets.
I get so irritated that to be considered kind of somebody who's of the ex-Mormon world, we got to buy into all of their hallucinations.
Yeah.
You know, good flips back because I wanted him to hear this part. I think this might be the juiciest part of the whole podcast.
I teed up the problem that we're facing. Any questions on the problem?
Well, I mean, honestly, John Larsen, for a while now, whenever I've kind of talked to you either on camera or off, especially when you had your hair in a little ponytail, I don't know if you still have a ponytail, I thought talking to John Larsen must be like what it was like talking to an Old Testament prophet, because there's
we were both lunatics. Unintentional irony
in the background. What's that, John?
Because we're all lunatics.
Your evil is stinking up our streets. The end is near. We are all gonna die.
Yeah, because you like think of these like old, crusty, curmudgeonly dudes who are like standing on the corner, half dressed, and they're like saying all this stuff that's depressing and calamitous, and you want to blow them off and even laugh at them or spit at them, and then like the metaphorical bear comes and tears you apart, right? In other words,
bear pig.
Turns out they were kind of right. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the only problem with the prophet is they actually were right.
He says problems with prophets is they're right. So it's like how far does that go either way?
Of course, but what he's referring to there is like Elijah, right? That's when they made fun of him for having a bald head and he sicked two she-bears on them. That wasn't like a story of he was right. That was he was a petty asshole who made a couple kids.
Well, he was right that
torn
the
to
bear would eat
pieces. Well, he didn't say the bear would eat him. He said, "Quit making fun of my bald head." They said no, and he's well, then fucking die. That's an
Well,
that's an
John
odd-
DeLynn. John DeLynn gets behind that, man. You can't make fun of him or die. You know, so Elijah was right.
Nowadays, I don't know if we can say the same thing about the modern equivalent of the prophets, seers, and revelators. But I used to kind of just ignore you and kind of blow you off.
I think you're equivalent. I think
I'm saying we're looking
just as
at
wrong.
I was about to say we're looking at the modern day equivalent of prophets, seers, and revelators.
Yeah.
Sometimes nowadays I'm paying a little more attention.
Well, you don't have to pay attention.
It's not like he's not just like one of 10 million of them anyway.
Even Doug Fabrizio covered.
Doug Fabrizio. Doug Fabrizio covers it. Oh my
He's
gosh.
covered this on Radio West several episodes. I heard you talking about it quite a bit ago. So I mean, somehow you're tapped into stuff.
Oh, somehow. Like this stuff isn't just pumped down our asses every day, everywhere on mainstream media.
Somehow you're tapped into this stuff. He's reading an article word for word.
And
What do you
came
mean?
out in the
How
New
did
York
you know
Times.
about all this Salt Lake? Well, somebody else wrote about it.
Front page super expose on a Sunday New York Times.
People are really paying attention or caring. And is it a crystal ball? Is it the priesthood? Is it Kimmy?
Yes, the New York Times is a palantir.
Is it Brent? What is it?
I read a great quote. Prognosticators aren't really good at seeing the future. They're good at seeing what's happening right now.
No, you aren't.
This thing we're talking about with the lake is not happening in the future. It's happening right now. Just as human
Okay,
beings.
then why did you just predict a bunch of like doomsday things that are going to happen in the future?
We tend to delay accepting news. It's like that person who has a spouse that's cheating on them that everybody sees, everybody knows except that person. When I'm
I think he just rambles more on that for a bit. So here's the thing he says about worst case scenarios.
Is that within X amount of time, 25 years, Salt Lake is completely uninhabitable. It will be vacated. That's worst case.
So can we put a bet on it? Like, I'll put a bet on it. I'll even hold my end of it. Like if it's not habitable, I'll pay up. Let's put $1,000
Yeah,
bet
I'll
on
bet
it.
big Vegas money, but I don't know. How
I'll
old
put
is John Larsen?
Let's put $1,000 bet on it. That'll be worth $10 by then, thanks to these policies by these ESG idiots. But
the problem
you
is
muted again there, Flip.
Yeah, I can't see it. So if that happens, you.
Sorry. I was gonna say put $1,000 into trust, and then in 20 years, if there's no Salt Lake City, then he gets it. Otherwise, you get it.
I'll put the bet. I'll put the bet down, John Larsen. I will put the bet down.
If you look at a lot of the predictions over the last 30 years for climate change, we are usually matching or beating, meaning the worst, our worst case scenario.
100% lie.
Climate guy setting the record straight about climate. This video is titled Climate Fraud at the New York Times. The New York Times publishes fraudulent articles about climate almost every day, but rarely is it so blatantly obvious and easy to discredit as the issue I'm going to be discussing.
So I recorded that one fast. Is it too fast?
No, it's pretty decent. I mean,
the New York Times has a webpage titled, How Much Hotter is Your Hometown Than When You Were Born? New York Times, climate. As the world warms because of human-induced climate change, most of us can expect to see more days when temperatures hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius, or higher. See how your hometown has changed so far and how much hotter it may get. So let's try out their website. I've tested this on quite a number of cities, but in this case, I'm going to be testing Mount Vernon, Illinois, and putting in my actual birth date of 1957. At the bottom of the page, it says scroll to continue. So let's do that and see what happens. Note at the bottom of the page now, it says, our data set goes back to 1960 when you were 3. Back then, the Mount Vernon area could expect about 30 days per year to reach at least 90 degrees. So this seems odd. Why does their data set only go back to 1960? The U.S. has very good historical records going back to at least 1895, and in many cases, much earlier than that. I'm going to show you in a minute why the New York Times is hiding all the data before 1960. But for now, let's just look at their claims about what's happened to the frequency of 90-degree days since 1960. They said that back then there were 30 days per year over 90 degrees. Let's scroll down a little further and see what comes up next. Look at this really fancy graphics they've got. It shows that in 1960, there were about 30 days per year above 90 degrees, and it says that now there's about 41 days per year over 90 degrees. Let's see if these claims are accurate. Has the number of 90-degree days actually increased at Mount Vernon, Illinois since 1960? The official government temperature gauge at Mount Vernon, Illinois, and the United States Historical Climatology Network shows the exact opposite of what the New York Times is claiming. In 1960, Mount Vernon, Illinois averaged about 40 days per year over 90 degrees. And the number's been dropping sharply, and now they only average about 16 days per year over 90 degrees. So far this year, Mount Vernon has only had 14 days over 90 degrees, much less than the 41 days which the New York Times is claiming. Also note that there hasn't been a 90-degree day in almost a month. And now that it's September, it seems pretty unlikely that they're going to have any more. So this year's been way below average, just like all recent years. Let's go back and look at the New York Times graph again for a second. They show a large increase in the number of 90-degree days since 1960 at Mount Vernon, Illinois. And in fact, there's actually—
Hold on, can I make a prediction here?
Showing is completely fraudulent.
So one of my favorite books I've read is called When Prophecy Fails. It was about this UFO cult back in I think the 50s, and it was a study where they got these people to be fake members of this UFO cult, and they had this whole study on it, and they wanted to see what happens to people when they make a very specific prophecy and that prophecy fails. And one of the tricks that they always use is, well, the fact that this went the complete opposite of what we said it would go actually increases like it actually makes us more believable now.
Well, so that's why
the fact that these 90-degree days have decreased, even though we said and continue to say that they are increasing, that actually is worse.
Well, that's why it shifted from global warming to climate change, right? Also, if you follow these guys, the big thing that they were saying in the 80s was second ice age coming. And then it changed to global warming, and then it changed to climate change.
Now let's continue on to their next graphic. This is their projection of how many 90-degree days Mount Vernon is going to have in the future. The New York Times is projecting that due to an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the number of 90-degree days in Mount Vernon, Illinois is going to increase from 31 in 1960 up to more than 70 days by the year 2089. This is the actual temperature data from NOAA going back to 1895 in Mount Vernon, Illinois. You can see that there's been a huge decrease in the frequency of 90-degree days since the 1930s. In the 1930s, they got about 75 days per year over 90 degrees. Now they're down to about 16. So as carbon dioxide has increased, the frequency of 90-degree days has plummeted. This trend is the exact opposite of what the New York Times is claiming. The New York Times shows the number of 90-degree days increasing as CO2 increases, but the actual data shows that the number of 90-degree days is decreasing as CO2 increases. This graph overlays the actual thermometer data from NOAA over here on the left and the New York Times projections on the right. It's not obvious from looking at this graphic, but both of these graphs are at the same scale. It goes from 1895 on the left up to 2090 on the right, and the y-axis goes from 0 up to 120. The first thing to notice is that the New York Times data from 1960 to the present is fake. They show the number of 90-degree days since 1960 increasing, when the actual thermometer data shows that it's been decreasing. But now comes the most serious part of their fraud. Remember at the beginning I mentioned that they were hiding all the temperatures before 1960? Well, now you can see why. It was really hot in the United States before 1960. Prior to 1960, 90-degree days were much more common in Mount Vernon, and as I'll show you in a minute, across the United States. No wonder the New York Times pretends there's no data before 1960, because it completely wrecks their global warming scale. This next graph shows every day over 90 degrees in Mount Vernon, Illinois since 1895. These red dots represent a day over 90 degrees, and it shows the actual temperature. Like in July 1936, Mount Vernon reached 114 degrees. But since the 1940s, there haven't been any temperatures over 105 degrees in Mount Vernon, Illinois. And in fact, days over 100 degrees have become extremely rare. They haven't had any in almost 7 years. So
this is happening now. It's not. I don't have any.
That's a good cut.
That was perfect.
Former Vice President Al Gore predicted back in his movie in 2006, it didn't happen. There he said back in 2009, 75% chance Arctic ice gone within the next 7 years. 8 years later, Arctic's still here. Let's look at fossil fuels talk. It's come true. Good to see you, by the way.
Good to be here. So look, there's so many of these catastrophic predictions in climate conversation, and it's very easy to make them. You get a lot of attention when you make them, and it'll be you and a few others who pull it out 10 years later and say, "What happened to that?" I don't know if you remember. Gore also told us.
Was this an apologist?
Fossil fuel. The U.S.
No.
in its electricity by now, and of course, that didn't happen either. There's so much to be gained by making these radical headlines.
No, he actually did like an hour with Jordan Peterson. I have a clip of it towards the
I
end. but
was
he's-
really hoping he was about to explain to us, but no, it's
no,
actually
of course, those guys are there. Those guys
Yeah,
exist
yeah.
everywhere, and there's somebody who will argue the other side of all these different scenarios and situations. But I think even beyond all this stuff is usually one of the things that somebody's pushing for is like send us money or tax this or
I
tax
know.
that for it, and that's
Or
the
vote for
dumbest
this
part
party.
of all of it. Yeah.
Well, that's
And-
that's sort of when John DeLynn tries to steelman capitalism early and maybe a capitalistic solution. It's, well, the church has a bunch of money, they could just throw it at it. And I'm like, that's never it. Throwing money at things is never the solution that capitalism. The solution that capitalism brings is usually innovation.
Yeah, and that's that. Yeah, I've got some clips of that earlier. So I'm going to skip a couple things. I'll mention them.
Although it'd be really funny if the church was able to throw their $100 billion and totally solve this problem somehow, if they actually did that, and then all of these ex-Mormons had to actually be glad that the church hoarded all of that wealth.
They wouldn't do it. They just forget it because I mean that's already something that they already squashed down and nobody cares about, even if it is all dangerous. But he says that the thing about he's not starting a cult at 104. He says
I'm the least likely person to own a cult or to run a cult.
Then he brags that he's leaving and all that sort of stuff. And then we get to this.
Here, I'll be right back. I got to run to the bathroom.
Oh, you're gonna miss Marks, man.
Marks.
The problem is, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, is we all know what, who was it? Was it Marx who referred to religion as the opiate of the masses? Because you would
what's that,
think that
Marx?
religion would be the world leader in organized religion would be the world leading organization. to
It's
make
so
people
deep,
aware of
man.
what's going on, sensitive to what's going on, prepared for what's going on, and able to fix what's going on before things get bad. Because why else have prophets? Why else have God? Why else have Jesus? Why else have commandments if it's not to like make the world a better place? And let's just face it, even now the world is way more religious than it is non-religious still, especially in the United States. So you think we'd be ahead of this ball game and already solving the problem. But the problem is I'm not so sure religion is waking us all up to see this ahead of time and fix the problem. Maybe it might even be numbing us and blinding us to your point, John Larsen, blinding us to what is actually happening. It's not that you're a prophet, you're just paying attention. And maybe some of us that are super religious maybe aren't
Such
paying
like
attention.
a college freshman.
It's all college freshman fix. It's all they're supposed to be nuanced. They're supposed to take all the sides, and all of it is first year college freshman of Brown University.
It really is. Like it's just so. Like I don't even know where to begin. Like
Did I miss,
there's also-
did I
there's
miss
so
the
much-
Marx quote?
Yeah, it turns out that religion's the opiate of the masses.
No, I know. One of my favorite clips in The Office is when, like, Ryan is one of my favorite characters in The Office because he always says something trying to act cultured or really intelligent, and somebody always calls him out on it. And there's this part where they go, Jim and Pam are christening their kid, and they walk into the church, and Ryan just goes, "Here it is, folks, the opiate of the masses." And somebody, I don't even remember what they said, but that's his character, is always saying things that you would find on the I'm 14 and this is deep subreddit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Top of the Sunday morning to you.
And the top of the day to you too, sir. Hope you brought your pipes. We're about to smoke the opium of the masses.
Oh, yes. Dooby-dooby-doo. I invited...
And there's some more reasons that we'll talk about in a second. So
I like that on Facebook, that if God real guy.
Oh, I
It's like,
love that page.
If God real, why no religion fix climate change?
and start talking about church.
I just don't think that we have such problems with what the scientific community is telling us, where we almost look like it, like John was saying, like it's prophesying. But you know, there's that saying of like, in every movie where the world is ending, there's like a crazy scientist who's like, I told you so, you should have listened to me. And they're like screaming with papers in their hands. But we do it in media, but we don't actually in real life. America doesn't, in my opinion, have as strong of a healthy culture that looks up to scientists as maybe other portions of the world. So you mix this, you know, fundamentalist nature into upholding the ideas of Christianity.
What the hell is she talking about? Where's the other place in the world that
state of
looks up
Utah,
to
with so many
science
of our
more than
legislators
America?
being of a certain faith? It just feels like it's just all of the problems of America.
I think this is not an LDS problem in particular. The ways that LDS people, Mormons, approach their religion is very similar to the way that fundamentalist Baptists and fundamentalist Catholics and evangelicals, and you know, we go on and on. They all have a very similar approach. And the world is a big, wide, complicated place. It is hard to navigate. So many things going on that you can't understand, that you don't understand, that you don't have time to understand. And what religion does, it creates a nice little box that you can live in. And there's nice people who will help you, and generally you gain from it. So it's win-win. The community benefits from you, you benefit from the community. And on a micro scale, it works great for individuals, but it tends to not be adaptable to change, and it tends to be very violent. in pursuing what it considers to be its enemies.
Fears of overpopulation and ecological disaster are also beginning to manifest with an anti-immigrant animus. The logic was expressed in its most dramatic and twisted form in the 2019 manifestos of mass shooters in both New Zealand and Texas.
If we can get rid of enough people, he wrote, then our way of life can become more sustainable.
Whether contemporary...
The religious people are violent, man.
Eco-fascism, huh?
Yeah, a lot of those mass shooters mentioned that they're afraid for the environment.
Just like it's always only really the racism.
Yeah, and
that
it
we
feels
hear
like
about.
so many.
Yeah, they never mentioned that that's in their manifestos entirely. Yeah, almost all of them. Like it's been a big part of every single one of the almost every one of them lately.
Religions, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or anything where it says like end at a certain point, and so you have any kind of mentality coupled with a fundamentalism.
I've got pictures of what are they called? The Extinction Rebellion on the screen here.
I just think it's overall dangerous for the longevity of the people in the community. They're all of like your unhealthy ideals about how we're going to get to this new Zion right now because there's going to be an end date. And so whether it's, evangelical,
like 18 years,
like a Jehovah's Witness, it just feels like Mormonism does have kind of a doomsday mentality to it, does it not? Like it doesn't give Mormonism a huge like, let's make the world better for the next 1,000 years,
Well, you're exactly right. And I think that's perfect transition. So that's our point one on the church. The church is an apocalyptic religion. It's in the name of the Church of Jesus Christ of latter days. The fundamental core belief of the church is we are in the end times. And Mormons are not the only ones who believe in that apocalyptic vision, right?
On level with like Christ scientists,
Yeah,
like
let's watch
you're
this.
bleeding out and you don't need to see a doctor, you need to pray over it. Like that there are companies that can, dump toxic sludge in our water and that we get cancer from. That the idea that you wouldn't try to stop our environment from polluting our lungs, our bloodstreams, and making this world able to facilitate more life.
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and
that seems so that's the most fundamentalist thing I've literally ever heard.
There were tens of
It's
thousands.
the most fundamentalist thing she's ever heard.
Literally.
So he says,
Good God.
Lots
to unpack there, sweetheart.
unpack.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's first year freshman stuff.
Partisanship
first year
aside,
freshman
but
is
also just
partisanship aside.
Describing the topography of American politics, it's almost like Ezra Taft Benson, and maybe you're going to get to this, John. Ezra Taft Benson establishes Mormonism as kind of the official Mormon religion, especially in Utah, and it just so happens that the way the Republican Party of the United States has progressed,
partisanship aside,
depending on your position, is to be making fun of global warming or to kind of deny global warming. That's going to also then influence Utah's approach or non-approach to climate change, right?
Well, I've heard it. Yeah, you're right, and I've heard it applied in Sacramento.
So he goes off on them talking about the typical stuff of Mormons are totally against environmentalism. And I think this is an interesting thing right here. I think I noticed this. Tell me if you guys think this is what I see here. This okay? Tell me. So I'll show you.
Let's see.
And political climate denial is a way to gain power and wealth still.
You're talking about coal mine owners, oil companies that
watch Dylan's face.
Huntsman Chemical, yeah.
Like the reason he doesn't like that is because he's courting John Huntsman. He doesn't like it. Yeah. He wants John Huntsman on the podcast, because he knows that John Huntsman's kind of
really
howdy. Yeah. So
oh man, that's hilarious.
Backwards. And now all the shit that's come from all those companies is settling into that fucking lake bed. So we talked about the apocalyptic religions. Now let's talk about the promised land.
That Al Gore is hanging from a massage chair with a Windsor knot. No, he's flying around in his private jet, contributing to said global warming, which he said probably would destroy the planet by now, I believe, unless they...
Well, it's all right to leave a giant carbon footprint as long as you're also helping the environment.
And at point number 7, you also have to believe that AOC in her little 5-page document is at the ready to solve the problem. Green New Deal, baby. Yeah.
See,
Dyatlov broke every rule we have. He pushed a reactor to the brink of destruction. He did these things believing there was a failsafe. AZ5, a simple button to shut it all down. But in the circumstances he created, there wasn't.